I came to New York and asked them I told them I wanted to publish a book that was going to talk about Michael Jackson not guilty. They said, we don't want anything that's pro-Jackson. And I actually called even one of the publishers that I've worked with for many years and spoke to the top person there. And she said, Aphrodite, I'm sorry, we can't do anything pro-Jackson. And I thought, this is wild. So in other words, the publishing world has decided that there will be nothing pro-Jackson, even though a courtroom has exonerated this man.
The media worldwide were out to get Michael Jackson. The money was in a conviction, okay? Berry Gordy, who founded Motown, told me after the acquittals that you cost the worldwide media billions by those not guilty verdicts, because the kind of copy that his being convicted, remanded to jail, the build-up to a sentencing, which would have been the biggest sentencing in world history, was something they wanted. You know, this was big, big business. They were doing everything they could to spin a conviction.
No one said, oh my goodness, we're sorry. We reported all the wrong things. Let's make the record straight now. No. In fact, they ignored the not guilty verdicts, and the paparazzi went right into, oh, we think he might have molested another boy, or wow, somebody else came out of the woodwork. All these things were later found to be untrue, but they make great headlines on the cover of rag papers and sell tabloids.
The media has a habit of building its heroes, all but erecting monuments to their splendor, harvesting a monetary windfall from their rise, and then, often at a perfectly arbitrary point of their choosing, they take a sledgehammer to the very same, profiting by their Pompeian downfall thereby. From the great Britney Spears parasol rampage of 2007 to the Amanda Bynes batshit barrage, the only thing the media loves more than an idol is a fallen one. And for those arguing that the presence of the aforementioned alarm system is a portent to pedophilia, consider for a moment how deeply paranoid Michael Jackson had become by this point. Michael confided to everyone from friends to his then-wife Lisa Marie Presley that he believed Sony were actively trying to have him assassinated for half of his ownership in the company.
And then the final part of the conversation was him telling me that he felt that that someone was going to try and kill him to get a hold of his catalog and his estate. And I really didn't know what to do with that.
Something that, given the Japanese vultures picking the King of Pop's corpse clean in the aftermath, is looking less and less paranoid by the microsecond. As Lisa Marie and Jackson family members have alleged, he also engaged in illicit drug use during this period, largely stemming from serious burns he sustained during a Pepsi commercial in the 1980s. We just listened to Teddy Riley describe a platinum chess set in his duplex-sized bedroom. Are you honestly contending that a silent alarm system and a secret entrance is not a fairly mild expression of the King of Pop's proven paranoia? But what of the sleeping with young boys allegations? Well, let's place this once again in its appropriate context. The prosecution never said Michael sleeps in the same bed as young boys, although that in and itself wouldn't connote pedophilia either. They said he sleeps in the same room as young boys. The problem? Michael Jackson's bedroom was the size of a fucking duplex!
Well, first of all, Larry, this notion that he sleeps with boys was a concoction by the prosecution. What he said very openly was that he allows families into his room. Now, his room is the size of a duplex. It's 2 levels. He's had mothers sleep there, fathers sleep there, sisters sleep there, brothers sleep there. The prosecution concocted this little saying about sleeping with boys because they thought it would turn off the jury, and they failed.
Look, saying Michael Jackson sleeps in the same room as boys is like saying I slept in the same room as my dad growing up because we were all in the same house. This is not uncommon in people who purchase mansions, by the by. To isolate one section of the estate off to yourself and essentially live out of that exclusively, rarely if ever venturing to any other rooms in a mansion aside from special occasions. This harkens back to the Paleolithic underpinnings of our cave-dwelling ancestors. Roman columns are bitchin' and all, but all the human brain really wants at the end of the day is a nice cozy cave replete with meat and heat. So yeah, boys slept in Michael Jackson's 2-story fucking room. So did their parents. So did entire fucking families when they were staying there. But if there's one cause for skepticism where Michael's innocence is concerned that I can actually relate to, it's with the decision to settle the Jordan Chandler case out of court for a reputed $20 million. So why in the fuck did Michael Jackson pay $20 million to cover up a crime I, and many other reasonable human beings, thoroughly believe he never committed?
Mr. Jackson had entered into that settlement because business advisors told him to. They weren't writing the check. They wanted to get him to get going in his business life and stop being derailed by this very salacious legal proceeding, and that he regretted doing it.
It's interesting because that settlement money, which is around the ballpark of $20 million, is something that never leaves people's minds. It seems as though that will always continue to be a controversial aspect in the legacy of Michael Jackson.
Well, remember, he was a billionaire. This person had money-making opportunities around the world that were endless. This was someone who could wake up in the morning, decide to go to any capital in the world, and make millions of dollars if he wanted to. So the amount of money he paid was nothing compared to what he was worth and what he could earn. And the people around him said, Michael, write the check, get rid of the case, let's move on. We have so many business opportunities everywhere, on every continent, and that's what he did. And it came back to haunt him, unfortunately. I think it was the wrong advice. I think he should have fought it and won.
The media is more than willing to tell us all that Michael Jackson paid out $20 million to Jordan Chandler and $1 million apiece to his parents. What they seem almost habitually unwilling to provide is fucking context for that act. You see, the Chandlers, acting on advice from their shyster shitbag Larry Feldman, deliberately waited to level charges for several months until Michael Jackson had begun his tour for the Dangerous album. The tour was split up into 2 legs, with a brief respite for recuperation in between, and this was no fucking accident. What this did is immediately press Michael Jackson toward a very difficult no-win choice. Either fight the allegations in court, canceling the second leg of his first major tour under the Sony banner, pissing off both his record company, concert promoter, lawyers, and fans in the process, and engaging in a trial that, while I'm firmly convinced would have cleared him ultimately of wrongdoing, would have also been a deeply dehumanizing and embarrassing one for the self-conscious pop star regardless. Why dehumanizing and embarrassing, you ask? Well, anyone like myself in their late 20s, early 30s remembers the following newsreel footage with crystal fucking clarity.
I have been forced to submit to a dehumanizing and humiliating examination by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff Department and the Los Angeles Police Department earlier this week. They served a search warrant on me which allowed them to view and photograph my body, including my penis, my buttocks, my lower torso, thighs, and any other area that they wanted. They were supposedly looking for any discoloration, spotting, blotches, or other evidence of a skin color disorder called vitiligo, which I have previously spoken about.
So the police took PP Polaroids of one of the most self-conscious and insecure individuals on planet Earth and threatened to pass them around a courtroom in an effort to determine whether the accuser had correctly identified Jackos Johnson. Incidentally, he didn't. How do we know this? Because the Chandler family, during the pre-trial phase, purposefully omitted them from evidence, without, of course, informing Michael Jackson, who at this point was already being pressured to settle by everyone from Sony, with whom he just inked the most lucrative recording contract in history, and who fully expected a return on said investment, the concert promoters for his first major tour in support of Dangerous, and, as Jackson's attorney during the 2005 case has since confirmed, his settlement-happy legal team as fucking well.
And Howard Weitzman have always acted in what they believed were Michael Jackson's best interests. And I believe that they thought those settlements were the best result for Michael, that they wanted to keep him out of a courtroom and let him do his music and his performance art, get him away from the lawyers. I understand that completely. Unfortunately, I think the decision to settle those cases was a disaster. And I think the settlements opened Pandora's box and resulted in his criminal case in 2004, 2005, as well as the current Wade Robson, Jimmy Safechuck civil cases. Woodley changed their opinions about what happened. They appear to have completely changed their memory of the facts and are seeking money. I don't have great faith that Mr. Weitzman and Mr. Branco will try these cases effectively in front of a judge or jury. My guess is that if a judge does not throw these cases out, that there'll be a settlement and that money will be paid by the estate. I hope that doesn't happen, but my guess is that Mr. Branca and Mr. Weitzman do not want and defend. That's my guess. I don't know. I'm not in their minds. This case go to a public trial, and unfortunately, Robson and Safechuck's lawyers know that. They know they're being opposed by some lawyers with a history of being involved with Michael Jackson when he settled cases.
So if he goes to trial, sure, MJ would have been cleared. As we've already established, the evidence against him was laughable. It literally did not exist. In fact, we know this evidence is weak because much of it was used in the 2005 case and was promptly laughed the fuck out of court.
Anyone who followed the case knew about the issue of 1108 evidence, which in California is called prior bad acts evidence. And what California allows, and few states do allow, is that in a case like this, you can bring in evidence of other alleged similar acts, even if they were never charged with a crime, and even if they're not the essence of the charge in this particular case. So what they said in their opening statement was, we have evidence that 5 young men were molested, and we're going to present all of that to you. And to make it even worse, it appeared, the judge did something I've never seen happen in a case like this. With respect to 3 of those alleged 5 victims, he allowed witnesses to come in and say they saw them molested without the prosecution having to bring the actual alleged victims in. They put on 3 guards who had worked at Neverland to say they saw these 3 people molested. One of them, Macaulay Culkin, okay, the actor, all right? Now, those 3 guards had sued Michael Jackson, claiming that he wrongfully terminated them. He had cross-complained, saying that they had stolen property from him. It was the longest civil trial in the history of Santa Maria. They lost their case. Jackson won his cross-complaint. He had $1 million judgment against all of them. There were judicial findings of fraud against all of them. They had gone to the tabloids and sold stories, and the 3 people they say they saw molested, they were my first 3 witnesses. They came in and said they were never touched.
So your options: fight, lose hundreds of millions, canceling your first Sony World Tour, actively defy the legal advice of your attorneys and insurance company, engage in a court case where you have every reason to believe your vitiligo-afflicted genitals will be made a public spectacle, or the other option was to settle for $20 million. A lot to you and me, but to Michael Jackson, who at that time owned half of Sony's music publishing, is a water molecule in a drop in a bucket in a fucking ocean. Then continue on tour, make that money back in a single fucking night, and everyone from Sony to the concert promoter to all the people he employs during said tour go home happy, and his dong ain't dangling in front of a jury, in all likelihood half the slack-jawed goddamn nation in the process. I agree, it was a stupid decision. Incidentally, by the end, so did Michael. But it doesn't make him a pedophile. It makes him a deeply non-confrontational cat being pressured from all sides by disparate multi-million-dollar conglomerates who stood to lose a fuck of a lot of money, but whose self-respect and reputation were left mercifully off the chopping block in the process, while Michael was left to twist in the wind, as if I needed another reason to hate the shit out of Sony. In the aftermath, Jordan Chandler was actually emancipated from both of his parents, took his money, fucked off to the Hollywood Hills, and never spoke to them again. He was given a chance to testify in the 2005 case, incidentally, but when he saw how easily the other witnesses crumbled under cross-examination...
I have to tell you, I've never seen so many witnesses provide so much salacious, disturbing testimony, and I've never seen so many witnesses crumble so quickly under cross-examination. I'll probably never see it again. I mean, it almost became a circus. People would get on that stand and say they'd seen the most horrific things on the planet. There would be just a heavy atmosphere in the courtroom, so you could almost cut the silence with a knife after they were finished. And on cross-examination, they would just splatter.
He conveniently decided not to show. Curious tactics if you're convinced Michael Jackson is a hardened pedophile. Michael Jackson did not fuck kids. It does not conform to logic. It does not conform to the facts. This fiction persists in full view of contradictory timetable evidence, and when brought before a jury in 2005, as much of the evidence from 1993 was, Michael was not only exonerated, but in a trial scheduled for between 6 to 8 months, he was acquitted in less than 5. He didn't barely scrape on by, he was vindicated fucking resoundingly. As for the so-called additional accusers, you may be interested to note that they were all disproven categorically in court. In 2005, due to the aforementioned ludicrous legal statute in California permitting evidence of prior acts, often through third-party hearsay, as such, the prosecution made a miserable attempt to pin Michael to the molestation of 5 other boys.
We started our case with 3 of those 5 young men who they claim were molested, and they all said, "He never touched me." That's how we began our case, 3 of the 5. The 4th one never showed up, And if he had, I think we were armed pretty well to deal with him, and that's Larry Feldman's client. There are a lot of other issues that go into that case that I don't have time to talk about. But let's just say that I had a lot of information to go after him on, not to mention the profit motive. Why do you take money and not go to the police and prosecute? Particularly, you know, if you're a family member, do you prefer to take money instead of having police and prosecutors go after you criminally? What does that tell you about the situation? The fifth young man was a so-called youth pastor who claimed he'd been tickled by Michael Jackson outside of his genes and needed 5 years' worth of therapy to deal with his trauma. And by the way, he wanted millions of dollars, his mother wanted it, and his mother also sold story to the tabloids.
Now, if I'm into kitty fucking, am I crazy? Or is Macaulay Culkin in the early 90s not my Cindy Crawford? I mean, look at the kid. He's goddamn adorable. Or for that matter, a young Corey Feldman, at least one of whom was molested by powerful people in Hollywood and was not shy about admitting it.
I was surrounded by them when I was 14 years old. Surrounded. Literally. Didn't even know it. It wasn't until I was old enough to realize what they were and what they wanted and what they were about and the types of people that were surrounding me till I went, oh my God, they were everywhere like vultures.
Vultures who Feldman says abused him and his best friend, the late child actor Corey Haim.
Michael Jackson was a witch hunt, okay? Let me just say this. He was a guy who was so innocent, so kind of sheltered, you couldn't even swear around him. You couldn't talk about drugs. You couldn't talk about nude women. You couldn't talk about sex. You couldn't talk about anything.
And if a couple troglodytic pants-shitting bodyguards who were actively suing Michael Jackson for wrongful termination at the time and wound up not only losing, but found guilty of stealing from the King of Pop are considered credible witnesses as to Michael's sexuality, well, all right, accepting the batshit premise that security guard testimony is manna from heaven, let's talk to some goddamn bodyguards about Michael's sexuality.
Was he a pedophile?
No, we don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Not at all.
Being a father myself and being a man, men know men. He had the desires of women like we do.
In fact, they say he had at least 2 girlfriends, dispelling that other rumor.
We had a curtain that covered the back seat. You couldn't see in the back seat. They talked back there and, you know.
So he's making out in the back seat?
Or chewing loud gum.
In talking to L.A. Reid, and in talking to Teddy Riley, guys who spent a lot of time with him, they both told me stories about these women in the studio. Okay, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I was, you know, everyone has their perceptions of what Michael was about. But I tell you what, L.A. Reid is a guy I know very well. I know Teddy Riley very well. These are very straight guys. And they're telling me that Michael had fine-ass women in the studio hanging out with him. I believe them. So it's interesting that there's this whole narrative about Michael as a heterosexual male, hanging out with guys I know who are very heterosexual male. But it's something interesting. He himself would never consciously, publicly, it was like he had this interesting thing.
So, that's your foolproof 1993 molestation case, folks. The one every blathering asshat in the country seems to believe was accurate. Not so much ironclad as tin-plated, isn't it? If you buy that shit as airtight, I got a Swiss cheese submarine I think you might be interested in. And one last parting shot for review tech. Hey, Richie boy, know what's even better than common sense? Fucking research! Razor fist, out! Just because you're in the backseat,